The notification pinged on my phone at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. After weeks of scrolling through overpriced studio apartments and sketchy basement rooms, I'd almost given up hope of finding anything decent in my budget. But there it was, a Craigslist ad posted just minutes earlier. 2-bedroom apartment in the historic district of Portland, hardwood floors, updated kitchen, $800 a month including utilities. The photos showed sun-drenched rooms with high ceilings and original crown molding. It was everything I'd been looking for at half the price I expected to pay. I should have known something was wrong. Should have trusted that sick feeling in my stomach that whispered this is too good to be true. But I was 3 days away from sleeping in my car, my savings account showing a balance that made me nauseous, and my pride wouldn't let me crawl back to my parents in Ohio with my tail between my legs. So I fired off an email immediately, trying to strike the right balance between interested and not too desperate. The response came within 15 minutes. Hi there. Apartment is still available. Can you meet tonight? I work early mornings so late evening works better for me. If you're interested, I can show you the place around midnight. Cash only for deposit. Let me know. Marcus. Midnight was an odd time for an apartment viewing, but I told myself he probably worked some kind of night shift job. The service industry, maybe, or hospital work. Lots of people had unconventional schedules. I was in no position to be picky about timing. I drove to the address through empty streets, past darkened storefronts and the occasional late-night diner glowing like a beacon in the urban darkness. The building was a beautiful Victorian conversion, the kind of place I'd dreamed of living in but never thought I could afford. Ornate stonework framed tall windows, and wrought iron fire escapes created intricate shadows on the brick facade. Marcus was waiting for me on the front steps, smoking a cigarette. In the dim streetlight, he looked ordinary enough, mid-30s, average height, wearing dark jeans and a plain black hoodie. His brown hair was slightly unkempt, and wire-rimmed glasses reflected the light in a way that made it hard to see his eyes clearly. When he saw me approaching, he dropped the cigarette and ground it under his heel with more force than seemed necessary. "You must be Sarah," he said, his voice soft and oddly flat. His handshake was limp and cold, like shaking hands with a dead fish. "Thanks for coming out so late. I know it's unconventional." "No problem," I lied, following him up the front steps. "I appreciate you being flexible." He led me through a beautifully restored lobby with original tile work and brass mailboxes, then up 2 flights of creaking wooden stairs. The hallway was dimly lit by antique sconces that cast more shadows than light. As we walked, I noticed that our footsteps echoed strangely, as if the building were much larger and emptier than it appeared. "Here we are," Marcus said, unlocking apartment 3B. Home sweet home. The apartment was everything the photos had promised and more. Gleaming hardwood floors stretched through spacious rooms filled with period details, original built-in bookcases, decorative molding, tall windows that would flood the space with natural light during the day. The kitchen was a perfect blend of vintage charm and modern updates, with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked barely used. "The previous tenant left pretty suddenly," Marcus explained as he showed me through the rooms. "Middle of the night, actually. Didn't even pack most of his stuff." He gestured toward my would-be bedroom, where several cardboard boxes were stacked neatly in one corner. "I've been meaning to deal with those, but you're welcome to go through them if you want. Might find something useful." The bedroom was larger than my last 3 apartments combined, with its own private bathroom and a walk-in closet. French doors opened onto a small balcony overlooking the building's interior courtyard. It was perfect, too perfect. "Why did the last tenant leave so suddenly?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Marcus adjusted his glasses, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of his eyes. They were pale blue, almost colorless, with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Mental health issues," he said simply. "Started getting paranoid, claiming I was doing things I wasn't doing. Sad situation, really. I tried to help him, but some people can't be helped." He showed me the rest of the apartment, the second bathroom, the living room with its original brick fireplace, the dining room that could easily seat 8 people. As we walked, I noticed that Marcus moved strangely, with a gliding step that barely made any sound on the hardwood floors. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A smell, maybe, or a feeling. Like the air itself was somehow thicker, harder to breathe. "So what do you do for work?" I asked, trying to fill the increasingly uncomfortable silence. I'm between jobs right now, he replied without elaborating. What about you? I just started at Powell's Books. Downtown location. He nodded but didn't seem particularly interested. We completed the tour in relative silence, Marcus answering my questions about utilities and parking with short, clipped responses. Despite my unease, I couldn't deny that the apartment was incredible. And at $800 a month, it would leave me with enough money to actually eat something other than ramen noodles. I'll take it, I heard myself saying. Marcus smiled for the first time since I'd met him, but it didn't reach his eyes. Excellent. I'll need first month's rent and security deposit tonight. Cash only. Tonight? I don't carry that much cash on me. There's an ATM at the corner store. I'll wait. Something about his insistence made me nervous, but I was desperate. I walked to the corner store, a dimly lit place with flickering fluorescent lights and a bored-looking clerk behind bulletproof glass. The ATM was ancient and took forever to process my transaction, but eventually I had the money in hand. When I returned to the apartment, Marcus had already prepared a lease agreement. It was handwritten on plain paper, not the official forms I was used to seeing. The handwriting was oddly precise, like calligraphy, but something about it made my skin crawl. The letters seemed to writhe slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. Shouldn't this be notarized or something? I asked. Not necessary for month-to-month arrangements, Marcus replied. This is just to make sure we're both protected. I signed the lease and handed over the cash, watching as Marcus counted each bill with deliberate slowness. His fingers were longer than they should have been, with yellowed nails that needed trimming. When he finished counting, he looked up at me with that unsettling smile. Welcome home, Sarah. I moved in 3 days later, arriving in the early afternoon with my meager possessions loaded into my beat-up Honda Civic. Marcus was nowhere to be seen, which was fine by me. I'd been having second thoughts about the whole arrangement, waking up the past few nights with fragments of strange dreams I couldn't quite remember. Dreams of long hallways and scratching sounds and pale eyes watching me from dark corners. The apartment looked different in daylight. Still beautiful, but somehow less inviting. The shadows seemed deeper, and the sunlight streaming through the windows had a strange quality, as if it were being filtered through dirty glass even though the windows appeared clean. I chalked it up to new place jitters and threw myself into the task of unpacking. By evening, I had most of my things arranged in my new room. It was then that I decided to investigate the boxes the previous tenant had left behind. Most of the contents were unremarkable: textbooks on psychology and sociology, outdated electronics, clothes that smelled faintly of cigarettes and something else I couldn't identify. But at the bottom of the third box, wrapped in an old t-shirt, I found a journal. The leather cover was worn and stained, held together with a rubber band. When I opened it, I found pages and pages of handwriting in blue ink, some entries neat and controlled, others increasingly frantic and barely legible. The first entry was dated 8 months earlier. Day 1, new apartment, new start. Marcus seems like a quiet guy, which is exactly what I need after my last roommate situation. Place is amazing for the price. Almost too good to be true, but I'm not complaining. I flipped through more pages, watching the tone of the entries gradually change. Day 15, Marcus is odd. Haven't seen him eat anything normal since I moved in. Only raw meat, and not the kind you'd get from a grocery store. Looks like something he hunted himself. When I asked about it, he just stared at me for a really long time without saying anything. Made my skin crawl. Day 23, the sounds at night are getting worse. Scratching in the walls, footsteps in the hallway that stop right outside my door. Marcus claims he doesn't hear anything, but I know he's lying. I can see it in his eyes. Day 31, found hair in my bathroom drain. Long, brown hair. Mine is short and blonde. When I confronted Marcus about it, he said maybe it was left by the previous tenant. But the previous tenant moved out 6 months ago. And this hair was fresh. Day 45, I'm losing my mind. Things in my room keep moving around. My bed is never the way I left it when I come home from work. Sometimes there are impressions in the mattress like someone's been lying there. Marcus just gives me that blank stare when I try to talk to him about it. Says I'm imagining things. Day 67, the smell is back. That putrid, rotting smell that comes and goes without warning. It's strongest near Marcus's room, but when I asked him about it, he claimed he couldn't smell anything. How is that possible? It's so strong it makes me gag. Day 89, I know he's been in my room. I set up a camera, but when I checked the footage, there were just hours of static. Every time I try to catch him, the technology fails. It's like he knows exactly what I'm doing. Day 102, called the police last night. Told them my roommate was harassing me, going through my things, possibly putting cameras in my room. They came and talked to Marcus, who was the picture of concerned innocence. Told them I'd been acting erratically, that he was worried about my mental health. They left without doing anything. I could see in their eyes that they believed him, not me. Day 118, can't sleep anymore. The scratching is constant now, and I swear I can hear breathing outside my door. Marcus stands in the hallway sometimes, just stands there for hours. When I look through the peephole, he's perfectly still, like a statue. But his eyes are always moving, scanning back and forth like he's looking for something. Day 127, found photos under my bed. Photos of me sleeping. Some are from inside my room, taken from different angles. Others are close-ups of my face, so close the camera must have been inches away. At the bottom was a note, "You're prettier when you can't run away. I'm getting out of here tonight. I don't care about the lease or my security deposit. Something is very wrong with Marcus. Something inhuman. If you're reading this, get out. Don't make the same mistake I did." The journal ended there, mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted. My hands were shaking as I closed the leather cover. Every rational part of my brain said this was just the paranoid delusions of someone with mental health issues, but I couldn't shake the feeling that every word was true. I decided to sleep on it, literally. Maybe things would look different in the morning. Maybe I'd realize I was overreacting to what was probably just creative writing or some kind of elaborate prank. But as I tried to fall asleep that first night, I became acutely aware of every sound in the building. The settling of old wood, the whisper of wind through gaps in the windows, the distant hum of traffic on the street below. And something else. Something that might have been breathing, just outside my bedroom door. I told myself it was my imagination, the power of suggestion from reading that disturbing journal. But the breathing continued, slow and steady, for what felt like hours. At some point I must have drifted off, because I woke to pale morning light filtering through my curtains and the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Marcus was up early, as he'd mentioned. I heard him moving around the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes, the whisper of cabinet doors opening and closing. When I finally emerged from my room around 8 a.m., he was nowhere to be seen, but there was evidence of his presence. A single plate in the sink, still bloody from whatever raw meat he'd been eating. The smell of it made my stomach turn. I tried to maintain a normal routine over the next few days. I went to work at the bookstore, came home in the evenings, made dinner, watched TV. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Marcus was always around, appearing silently in doorways, sitting motionless in the living room staring at nothing, moving through the apartment with that strange, soundless step. He never seemed to sleep. No matter what time I got up during the night, to use the bathroom, to get a drink of water, to check the locks on the front door, I could see light under his bedroom door and hear movement inside. And always, there was that smell. Organic and putrid, like something dead and rotting, but only in certain areas of the apartment and only at certain times. On my 5th night in the apartment, I woke to the sound of scratching. Soft at first, like mice in the walls, but gradually growing louder and more deliberate. It was coming from directly behind my headboard, as if someone were dragging their fingernails down the inside of the wall. I lay frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, rhythmic and purposeful, before finally stopping just as the first hints of dawn began to show through my windows. The next morning, I examined the wall behind my bed. The paint was old and had some hairline cracks, but nothing that would explain the sounds I'd heard. When Marcus emerged from his room around noon, I mentioned the noise casually. "Old building," he said without looking at me, his voice that same flat monotone. "Probably just settling. Or mice. These old places are full of mice." But I knew what I'd heard. And it wasn't mice. Over the next week, the incidents escalated. I'd come home from work to find my bedroom door standing open when I was certain I'd closed it. Items on my dresser would be rearranged, not dramatically, just slightly off from where I'd left them, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. My bed would be unmade even though I always made it before leaving for work. Once, I found a single long brown hair on my pillow. My hair was short and blonde. I started keeping a detailed log of every incident, just like the previous tenant had done. Date, time, what I'd found, how I'd left things. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone was going through my room while I was at work. Someone with brown hair who was tall enough to leave impressions on my bed and careless enough to leave evidence behind. When I confronted Marcus about it, he gave me that blank stare I was beginning to hate. "Are you sure you're remembering correctly?" he asked. "Stress can affect memory. Maybe you should talk to someone about what you're going through." A professional. That night, I installed a lock on my bedroom door. A good one, with a deadbolt that required a key from both sides. I made sure Marcus saw me doing it, watching him from the corner of my eye as I worked. He stood in the hallway the entire time, perfectly still, those pale eyes fixed on my hands as I fitted the hardware into the door frame. "Don't trust me?" he asked when I finished. "It's not about trust," I lied. "I just value my privacy." He nodded slowly, but something dark flickered across his face. "Privacy is important," he agreed. "Everyone deserves their secrets." There was something about the way he said it that made my skin crawl. Like he was implying he knew secrets about me that I didn't even know myself. That night, the scratching returned. But this time, it wasn't coming from inside the walls. It was coming from the other side of my bedroom door. Long, deliberate scratches, like fingernails being dragged down wood. I crept to the door as quietly as possible and peered through the peephole I'd had installed along with the new lock. The hallway was dark, but I could make out a shape crouched directly outside my door. Someone was kneeling there, perfectly still except for one arm that moved rhythmically up and down. In the dim light, I could see pale fingers with yellowed nails scraping against the wood. Scratch. 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 I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address and explaining that someone was trying to break into my room. The scratching stopped immediately, as if whoever was out there could hear my phone call through the door. By the time the police arrived 20 minutes later, the hallway was empty. Marcus answered the door in pajamas and a robe, looking confused and concerned. He spoke to the officers in that same soft, reasonable tone, explaining that I'd been acting strangely since moving in, that he was worried about my mental state. "I've been trying to be patient with her," he told them, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed calculated to make him appear more sympathetic. "But she's been making accusations, claiming I'm doing things I'm not doing. I think she might need professional help." The officers searched the hallway, found no evidence of forced entry or attempted break-in, and left with a warning about filing false reports. Marcus stood in the living room after they'd gone, staring at me with those dead eyes. "You seem very upset," he said. "Maybe you should consider talking to someone? A therapist, perhaps. I can give you some recommendations." I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed to move independently of its source. I started keeping a baseball bat beside my bed and sleeping with all the lights on, but nothing helped the growing sense of dread that followed me everywhere. The smell returned on my 15th day in the apartment, stronger than it had ever been before. This time, it seemed to be emanating specifically from Marcus's room. When I knocked on his door to ask about it, there was no answer, even though I'd seen him go in there less than an hour earlier and hadn't heard him leave. I pressed my ear to the door and heard something that made my blood run cold. A wet, sliding sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. And underneath that, a rhythmic thumping, like someone repeatedly hitting meat with a hammer. "Marcus?" I called out louder. "Are you okay in there?" The sound stopped abruptly. After a few moments, his voice came through the door, but it sounded wrong somehow. Strained and breathless, like he was speaking through gritted teeth. "I'm fine. Just rearranging furniture." But I knew that wasn't what I'd heard. And the smell was getting stronger, seeping out from under his door like poison gas. I spent the rest of the evening in my room with the windows open, trying to get some fresh air, but the putrid odor seemed to follow me everywhere. That night, I was jolted awake by the sound of my bedroom door handle rattling violently. Someone was trying to get in, but the new lock was holding. The rattling continued for several minutes, accompanied by what sounded like frustrated breathing. Then came a new sound, scratching, but not on the door this time. On the walls around the door frame, as if someone were trying to claw their way through. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the door. In the gap between the door and the floor, I could see shadows moving back and forth. 2 shadows, as if someone were pacing right outside my room. "Marcus?" I whispered. "Is that you?" The shadows stopped moving. There was a long moment of silence, then a voice came through the door. But it wasn't Marcus's voice. It was deeper, rougher, with an accent I couldn't place. "I'm not Marcus," the voice said, followed by a sound that might have been laughter if laughter could be filled with malice and hunger. My blood turned to ice. I fumbled for my phone to call 911, but before I could dial, I heard footsteps moving away from the door. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that seemed to shake the floor with each step. By the time the police arrived, Marcus was in his room claiming he'd been asleep all night and hadn't heard anything unusual. But I knew what I'd heard. And I knew that whatever was living in this apartment with me, it wasn't entirely human. The next day, I did some research at work during my lunch break. I found the previous tenant on social media and sent him a private message, explaining that I was living in his old apartment and had found his journal. His response came within hours, and reading it made my hands shake so violently I could barely hold my phone. "Jesus Christ, you're still there? I should have warned you, but I was too scared he'd find me." Marcus isn't his real name. His real name is David Kresh, and he was institutionalized for 3 years before I moved in with him. I found out after I'd been living there for 2 months. He killed his previous roommate, dismembered him in his bedroom and claimed it was self-defense. The case file was sealed, but I found newspaper articles. The evidence didn't add up. The victim was found in pieces, but David only had minor scratches. No way it was self-defense. But here's the thing that really scared me, I found out what institution he was released from. Danvers State Hospital. You know, the old asylum they tore down? The one where they did all those experiments on patients? David was in the part they never demolished, the underground levels where they kept the worst cases. He was there for 3 years, and when he came out, he wasn't the same person who went in. I started having nightmares after I found all this out. Dreams of long white hallways and screaming that never stopped. And David? He knew I'd been researching him. Started leaving things for me to find. Photos, like I mentioned in the journal. But also other things. Body parts. Fingers, mostly, but once I found what I think was a human ear in my desk drawer. The police wouldn't help because he was always so convincing, so normal seeming when they were around. But when it was just us, he dropped the act. I saw him eat raw meat with his bare hands, saw him move furniture around the apartment without making a sound, saw him do things that no normal person should be able to do. Get out. Get out now. And whatever you do, don't let him know you're planning to leave. He can sense it somehow. The last few days before I escaped, he barely left me alone. Always watching, always waiting. I think he was planning to add me to his collection. If you can read this message, you're still alive, which means there's still time. But don't wait. Don't think you can handle it or that it will get better. It won't. He's not human anymore, and he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. I read the message 3 times before it fully sank in. My roommate was not only a murderer, but something far worse than that. Something that had been twisted and changed by whatever had happened to him in that underground asylum. I was trapped in an apartment with a monster, and I had to get out before it was too late. But leaving wouldn't be simple. Marcus, David, was always there, always watching. I'd have to be careful, strategic. I couldn't just pack up and go because he'd know what I was planning. I'd have to do it gradually, taking a few things at a time, making it look like normal daily activities. I started that afternoon, putting my most important documents and valuables in my purse and transferring them to my car during routine trips to the grocery store or coffee shop. Each time I left the apartment, I felt Marcus's eyes on me, but I forced myself to act normally, to maintain the same routines I'd established since moving in. But Marcus was getting more aggressive. The nightly scratching at my door became a constant, sometimes lasting for hours. I'd wake up to find wet handprints on my bedroom windows, from the inside, as if someone had been in my room while I slept despite the locked door. My food began disappearing from the refrigerator, replaced with chunks of raw, bloody meat that smelled like it had been rotting for days. When I confronted Marcus about the meat, he gave me that familiar blank stare. "I've never seen that before," he said. "Maybe you bought it and forgot." Stress can affect memory in strange ways. "I'm vegetarian, Marcus. I don't buy meat." He tilted his head slightly, like a dog hearing an unusual sound. "Are you sure? People change their habits sometimes without realizing it. Maybe you should keep a food diary, track what you're eating. I can help you with that if you want." The offer made my skin crawl. The idea of Marcus monitoring my eating habits, keeping track of what I consumed, felt like a violation that went beyond anything he'd done so far. That night, I decided to set up a hidden camera in my room. I'd found a small wireless model online that could record to cloud storage, virtually undetectable if placed correctly. I positioned it behind some books on my shelf, angled to capture most of the room, and activated it before going to bed. I barely slept, hyper-aware of every sound in the apartment. Around 3 a.m., I heard my door handle rattling again, but this time there was something different about it. The sound was more rhythmic, almost like someone was picking the lock. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, as the rattling continued for what felt like hours. Then it stopped, and I heard the soft click of my door opening. My heart hammered against my ribs as I forced myself to keep my eyes closed, to maintain the slow, steady breathing of sleep. I could hear footsteps on my hardwood floor, soft but deliberate, moving slowly around my bed. The footsteps stopped right beside my head, and I could feel someone leaning over me, could smell that putrid odor of decay and something else, something metallic and sharp, like fresh blood. I felt breath on my face, warm and humid, and it took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to scream. Then came a sound that nearly broke my composure entirely, the soft click of a camera shutter. He was taking pictures of me while I pretended to sleep, just like he'd done to the previous tenant. The footsteps moved away from the bed, circling the room slowly. I could hear dresser drawers being opened, the rustle of papers being shuffled through, the soft thud of items being moved around. He was going through my things while I lay there helpless, cataloging my possessions, learning my habits, invading every aspect of my privacy. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the soft click of my door closing and the faint sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway. Only then did I allow myself to breathe normally, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and terror. The next morning, I checked the camera footage on my phone, expecting to see clear evidence of Marcus's nighttime visit. Instead, I found 8 hours of static. The camera had recorded perfectly until the moment my door opened, then nothing but white noise until morning. Just like the previous tenant had described. But I had other evidence. My dresser drawers were slightly open, my papers were in a different order, and there was a single long brown hair on my pillow. Most disturbing of all, I found a pile of photographs tucked under my mattress, dozens of images of me sleeping, taken from various angles around the room. Some were close-ups of my face, so close that the camera must have been inches away when they were taken. At the bottom of the pile was a handwritten note in Marcus's precise script: "You're even more beautiful when you can't run away. Soon you won't have to pretend to sleep." That was it. I couldn't wait any longer, couldn't try to leave gradually. I had to get out immediately, before Marcus escalated from stalking to something worse. I called in sick to work and systematically packed everything I could fit in my car, making multiple trips and constantly looking over my shoulder. Marcus's bedroom door remained closed the entire time, but I had the distinct feeling he was awake in there, listening to everything I did. By evening, I had loaded most of my essential belongings. I planned to leave early the next morning, before Marcus was typically up and moving around. But as I tried to fall asleep that last night, I realized something had changed. The apartment was too quiet. Usually, I could hear Marcus moving around at all hours, but tonight there was nothing. No footsteps, no sounds from his room, no scratching at my door. The silence was somehow more terrifying than all the noise had been. Around 2 a.m., I heard the front door open and close. Then footsteps in the living room, But they sounded different, heavier, more purposeful. They moved through the apartment slowly, deliberately, stopping outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, waiting for the usual rattling of the handle or scratching at the wood. Instead, I heard a key sliding into my lock. Terror flooded my system as I realized that Marcus must have made a copy of my key, probably on one of the many nights he'd been in my room going through my things. The deadbolt turned with a soft click, and my door swung open silently. But the figure that stepped into my room wasn't Marcus. At least, it didn't look like Marcus anymore. It was taller, thinner, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its face was pale and gaunt, with those same colorless eyes but somehow larger, more prominent. And its smile, God, that smile. Too wide, showing too many teeth, some of which looked distinctly non-human. "Hello, Sarah," it said in that voice I'd heard through the door days earlier. Deeper than Marcus's voice, with that strange accent that seemed to shift and change as it spoke. "I've been waiting for you to stop pretending to sleep." I sat up in bed, my back pressed against the headboard, clutching my baseball bat with both hands. "What do you want?" It tilted its head, studying me with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. "What do I want?" "I want what I've always wanted. Companionship. Someone to share my home with. Someone who understands what I am." "You're sick," I whispered. "You need help." The thing that had been Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with static. "Sick? No, Sarah. I'm evolved. The doctors at Danvers helped me become something better than human. Something that doesn't need to follow human rules or limitations." It took a step closer to the bed, and I could see that its fingernails had grown longer, sharper, more like claws than human nails. The previous tenant didn't appreciate what I was trying to give him. He was ungrateful, trying to expose me, trying to take away everything I'd worked for. So I had to make him understand. I had to make him part of me. "You killed him." "I absorbed him. He's still here, in a way. Would you like to meet him?" Before I could respond, the thing's face began to change. The features shifted and blurred, the pale skin rippling like water. For a moment, I saw another face looking back at me, young, terrified, with pleading eyes and a mouth that moved soundlessly as if trying to scream. Then Marcus's face returned, still wearing that horrible smile. "He's much quieter now," it said. "Much more cooperative. You could be the same way, Sarah. You could stop fighting and let me help you become something better." I gripped the baseball bat tighter, knowing it would be useless against whatever this thing was but needing something to hold on to. "I'm leaving. Tonight. I'm packed and ready to go, and you can't stop me." The smile widened even further, impossible stretching the skin of its face until I thought it might tear. "Oh, but I can stop you, Sarah. I've been preparing for this moment ever since you moved in. Did you really think I didn't know what you were planning?" It reached into its pocket and pulled out my car keys, dangling them in front of me like a taunt. "Looking for these? I took them while you were packing. Along with your phone charger, your wallet, and a few other essentials. You're not going anywhere, Sarah. This is your home now. This is where you belong." Panic flooded my system as I realized the full extent of my situation. I was trapped in an apartment with a monster, no way to escape, no way to call for help. My phone was nearly dead, my car was useless without keys, and even if I could get out of the building, where would I go? Marcus, or whatever he'd become, knew where I worked, knew my routines, probably knew more about me than I knew about myself. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to stop running," it said, moving closer to the bed. "I want you to accept what's happening. I want you to let me help you become something better than what you are." "And if I refuse?" The smile faded, replaced by an expression of cold calculation. "Then you'll join my collection. Just like the others. Just like the previous tenant, and the one before him, and the one before him. I've been collecting for a very long time, Sarah. Danvers taught me patience, taught me how to wait for the right moment." It gestured toward the wall behind my bed, and for the first time I noticed that the scratching sounds I'd been hearing weren't coming from inside the walls. They were coming from behind the walls, from some kind of hidden space where something, or someone, was trapped. They're all still here, it said. Still part of me. Still part of this place. You can join them willingly, or I can make the choice for you. But either way, you're not leaving. I made my decision in that instant. Whatever this thing planned to do to me, I wasn't going to make it easy. I swung the baseball bat as hard as I could, aiming for its head. The bat connected with a sound like hitting wet clay, and the thing staggered backward, its face partially caved in on one side. But instead of falling or crying out in pain, it simply reached up and pushed the damaged flesh back into place with a wet, squelching sound. That wasn't very nice, Sarah, it said, its voice now distorted by the reconstructed jaw. I was hoping we could do this the easy way. I scrambled off the bed and ran for the door, but it moved faster than anything human should be able to move. One moment it was across the room, the next it was blocking my path, those impossibly long arms stretched out to either side to prevent my escape. Where are you going? It asked, tilting its head at an unnatural angle. This is your home now. Our home. I swung the bat again, this time aiming for its midsection. The impact sent it stumbling backward, and I heard something crack, ribs, maybe, or whatever passed for ribs in its current form. It looked down at its chest with mild interest, then back up at me with that horrible smile. You're stronger than the others, it said approvingly. I like that. You'll make a wonderful addition to my collection. I pushed past it and ran for the front door, but when I reached for the handle, I found it wouldn't turn. The door was locked from the inside with some kind of mechanism I'd never seen before, multiple deadbolts and chains that looked like they'd been welded into place. The building has been condemned for 2 years, the thing said, appearing behind me with that same impossible speed. No one comes here anymore. No one will hear you scream. I spun around to face it, raising the bat defensively. The police will come looking for me when I don't show up for work. People will notice I'm missing. Will they? You're new in town, no close friends, no family nearby. Your job thinks you called in sick. By the time anyone realizes you're gone, you'll already be part of me. Part of this place. It was right, and we both knew it. I was completely alone, trapped with a monster in a building that shouldn't even exist. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight. I feinted left with the bat, then dove right toward the kitchen. If I could get to the knives, maybe I'd have a better chance. But as I reached for the knife block, the thing's hand closed around my wrist with crushing force. No more games, Sarah, it said, its grip tightening until I could feel my bones grinding together. It's time to join the others. The pain in my wrist was excruciating, but I managed to grab a large chef's knife with my free hand. I drove the blade deep into the thing's arm, expecting it to let go, to bleed, to react like any living creature would. Instead, it looked down at the knife protruding from its flesh with mild curiosity. No blood flowed from the wound. The thing simply reached over with its other hand and pulled the blade free, then examined it like it was an interesting artifact. Sharp, it commented. But ineffective against someone like me. It grabbed me by the throat and lifted me off the ground effortlessly. My feet kicked uselessly as it carried me back toward my bedroom, its fingers cold and unnaturally strong around my neck. I could feel my consciousness starting to fade as my air supply was cut off. Don't worry, it whispered in my ear. The transformation doesn't hurt much. And afterward, you'll understand. You'll see how much better this is than being merely human. Just as I thought I was about to pass out, I heard something that filled me with desperate hope, sirens in the distance, growing closer. The thing heard them too, its head snapping toward the window with an expression of alarm. That's impossible, it muttered. No one knows about this place. The sirens were getting louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy vehicles on the street below. Through my bedroom window, I could see flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the building across the courtyard. I triggered a silent alarm, I gasped as its grip loosened slightly. Hidden panic button app on my phone. Been recording everything since you came in my room. It wasn't true, my phone was nearly dead and I'd never heard of such an app, but the lie seemed to work. The thing dropped me to the floor and rushed to the window, peering down at the street below. Police, fire department, EMTs, it said, its voice tight with what might have been fear. How did they know to come here? I didn't waste time explaining. While it was distracted, I grabbed my phone and ran for the bathroom, locking myself inside. The battery was at 3%, but I managed to dial 911 before it died completely. This is 911, what's your emergency? I'm trapped in apartment 3B at. I started to give the address, then realized I wasn't entirely sure where I was. The building looked like the address Marcus had given me, but if it had been condemned for 2 years, how was that possible? Ma'am, can you repeat that address? Before I could answer, the bathroom door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. The thing stood in the doorway, no longer bothering to maintain its hue and appearance. It had grown taller, its limbs stretching and elongating, its face becoming something out of a nightmare. Multiple eyes had opened across its forehead, and its mouth had split into a vertical gash filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. No more interruptions, it hissed in a voice like grinding metal. I could hear the 911 operator still talking through my dead phone, but there was no way to respond. The thing reached for me with arms that had become tentacle-like appendages, covered in what looked like suckers but were actually tiny mouths, each one opening and closing hungrily. Then the apartment's front door exploded inward with a deafening crash. Police. Everyone on the ground. Heavy footsteps thundered through the apartment as armed officers flooded in. The thing spun toward the sound, its multiple eyes fixing on the doorway with malevolent fury. This is my domain, it snarled. You have no power here. But something strange was happening. As the officers approached, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, the thing began to waver and distort, like a mirage in desert heat. The sirens I'd heard, the police presence, somehow they were disrupting whatever hold it had over this place. The building doesn't exist, I heard one of the officers saying into his radio. Dispatch, we're standing in an empty lot. There's nothing here but a foundation and some rubble. The thing let out a shriek of rage and frustration that sounded like feedback from a broken speaker. Its form was becoming increasingly unstable, pieces of it flickering in and out of existence. You can't leave, it said, reaching for me one last time. You belong to me now. You're part of my collection. But its touch passed right through me, insubstantial as smoke. The apartment around us was dissolving, walls becoming transparent, furniture fading away like fog. Through the disappearing floor, I could see concrete foundations and piles of rubble, the remains of whatever building had actually stood here. Ma'am, are you all right? I looked up to see a police officer reaching down to help me up. I was sitting on bare concrete in what appeared to be the basement of a demolished building, surrounded by debris and broken pipes. My clothes were torn and dirty, my wrist was swollen where the thing had grabbed me, but I was alive. How did you find me? I asked as the officer helped me to my feet. Anonymous tip, he said. Someone called in saying they heard screaming from this location. We almost didn't respond because the building was torn down 2 years ago, but protocol requires us to check out every call. As they led me out of the ruins, I looked back once. In the shadows between the broken walls, I thought I saw a pale figure watching me, its colorless eyes filled with rage and hunger. But when I blinked, there was nothing there but darkness and decay. The police report listed me as a possible victim of assault and kidnapping, though they never found any evidence of my attacker. The apartment I thought I'd been living in didn't exist. The building had been demolished after being condemned due to structural damage and reports of unusual phenomena. The lease I'd signed was on paper that didn't match any legitimate forms, and the bank account where my rent money had been deposited belonged to someone who'd been dead for 3 years. Marcus Rivera, or David Kresh, or whatever his real name was, had no official existence. No social security number, no employment records, no medical history. It was as if he'd never been born, or had somehow been erased from every database and document that might have proved his existence. The doctors who examined me found evidence of prolonged stress and minor injuries consistent with a struggle, but no signs of serious physical trauma. They recommended psychological counseling, suggesting I might have experienced some kind of dissociative episode brought on by the stress of moving to a new city and financial pressures. But I knew what I'd experienced was real. The journal I'd found was real. The police recovered it from my car, though they couldn't trace its origins. The photographs of me sleeping were real, printed on paper that forensic analysis couldn't identify. And the scars on my wrist where the thing had grabbed me were real, forming a pattern that looked disturbingly like fingerprints but with too many joints, too many knuckles. I left Portland that same day, driving straight through to my parents' house in Ohio. I didn't stop except for gas, didn't sleep until I was over 1,000 miles away from that place. Even now, 6 months later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night convinced I can smell that putrid odor of decay and rot. I've moved twice since then, each time to a different state, each time telling myself I'm being paranoid. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched, that somewhere in the shadows between reality and nightmare, that thing is still looking for me. Sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet and still, I hear it. Scratch. 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 Just outside my bedroom door. And I know that no matter how far I run, no matter how many locks I install or how many cities I put between us, it will never stop hunting for me. Because I've seen what it really is, and I escaped from its collection when no one else ever had. I am the one that got away. And it will never forgive me for that. This account was submitted anonymously to a paranormal investigation forum in late 2023. The writer has never been identified, though several investigators have attempted to verify the details. Portland police records confirm a welfare check at the described location on the date mentioned, but listed as a false alarm, no structure present. The Danvers State Hospital referenced in the account was indeed demolished, though portions of the underground levels were never properly excavated due to budget constraints and safety concerns. 3 other similar accounts have surfaced online since this post was made, all describing encounters with entities that seem to exist in the spaces between reality and imagination. If you have experienced anything similar, or if you have information about the identity of the writer, please contact the forum moderators immediately. A final warning: if you are currently living in a situation that feels unsafe or unreal, trust your instincts and seek help immediately. Sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones that convince you they don't exist. The investigation continues.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey. Here are a couple more videos for you to check out.